Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar. I am Ashley Wiegand, and I will be talking to you today about our wellness service called NeuroFit. Thank you for joining me, and let's get started. So I'm a provider at Palm Health. As I said, my name is Ashley Wiegand. I'm a licensed mental health therapist, and I also have my PhD in therapy as well. And I am the certified neurofeedback therapist. And I'm here to talk to you today about a new service that we're launching called NeuroFit. And I would call it a wellness service for your brain health. So the objectives for the webinar today is introduce you to NeuroFit, explain and go over how it works, how it can help you with what kinds of goals, and how is it different from clinical neurofeedback. So clinical neurofeedback is a service I'm currently doing now. So if you have heard of neurofeedback at Palm, that's what you would already be familiar with. So NeuroFit is a wellness-based neurofeedback program. It's going to be run similarly to a wellness or vitality service. So you'll be guided through it with a wellness tech. It's a 30-minute long session, and it's going to be you're going to be guided based on your goals or reported symptoms. Then a lot of it will be self-directed by you as you move through the training over a session. It's going to have fewer wires and a more seamless technology for use. And then you're going to be doing the training on an iPad. You'll get the visual and auditory feedback. And the goal for us with this service is for it to be more available to a broader range of members at Palm, greater flexibility as a supplemental service. So what is NeuroFit? NeuroFit is neurofeedback. So biofeedback, let's start there. That's the umbrella term for something being measured about our biology, but better said, our physiology. And then that metric that's being measured, let's do a broad example like heart rate. That's being measured in real time. And then what is happening with your heart rate is being given back to you, the information about how your heart rate is shifting. Is it going up? Is it going down, for instance? So that's biofeedback, something being measured about your biology. The information is fed back to you, and then you use that information about that internal metric to try to shift it or change it. So within that, there are many types of biofeedback, and so neurofeedback is a specific kind of biofeedback. So what's happening with biofeedback or neurofeedback is it's actually a learning therapy, or what's called a behavioral therapy at its core. And you're training through that informational feedback loop. So it's a way to train what's called self-regulation. And that is a way to shift or change something about your internal state, your cognitive processing, your emotional regulation, etc. So how neurofeedback is different, or better said, more specialized or specific, is you're specifically training what's called your brain waves. So that's the electrical activity of the brain, and that relates to your brain state and brain functionality. We're able to do biofeedback based on the principle of neuroplasticity, which is that our brain can change. We can learn new habits, So the brain can form new connections, it can prune away old connections. So that is the basic scientific principle it operates on. So getting a little bit more technical, this learning therapy or feedback loop, the psychology term for that is operant conditioning. So it's learning facilitated based on getting a condition or a reward when you do something that you want or shift in the direction that you want to go. So this would be an example of that is when, let's say, a student in second grade does well on a test and they get a prize. So the prize is the reward that gives positive feedback to reinforce what the person did. So it's harnessing that principle and then targeting it for shifting and regulating our internal state. So the pro and advantages of neurofeedback and thus NeuroFit are this kind of training has a very low risk of side effects. It's non-invasive, it's drug-free. So it's empowering you to be involved in your own healing. So this is a graphic that illustrates the feedback loop that I was just talking about. So you have, this is the client, and so there would be a sensor on the head in NeuroFit measuring your brainwave activity. So this represents that the digitizing of your brainwave activity. So it goes from the sensors through the hardware to the clinician's screen. And so that's going to be analyzed and quantified when you're moving it in the direction that you want it to go. And then the technician, clinician, and the client all get various kinds of information. And then as the client shifts it in the direction you want it to go, then you're going to get feedback on the screen. So it creates this really powerful feedback loop. So what's so powerful about this is we're getting feedback or information about the subtle shifts in our internal brain state that we can't sense on our own. So let's look at another example that feels less abstract, like our heart rate. So no matter how much we meditate or how smart we are, we can't sit quietly and look inward and know exactly what our resting heart rate is. And this is because the set point of our heart rate is managed by unconscious parts of our brain. So our frontal lobes, where we have our conscious processing and awareness, no matter how much we try, we can never know that on our own. However, if we had a heart rate monitor or a smartwatch, we could quickly look down and see what our heart rate is. So that's a metric now giving information about a biological process that the specifics of were unconscious to us without the device. So let's take this example and then now look at our brainwaves. We'll get into this in a little bit, but we have what's called brainwave frequencies. So one of those is called alpha. So none of us sitting quietly or trying to attune inward can know what the amplitude or power of our alpha waves is. This is something that is impacted by genetics, but then shifts based on brain state, environment, and habits. So we can't know when our alpha frequency is going up or down. However, the technology of NeuroFit with the sensors and the software can track our alpha wave fluctuations essentially in real time. So then let's say we want to increase our alpha. So when our alpha is increased, the technology can sense that and then give that feedback back to us that we're moving our brain in the right direction. So now we're getting real-time personalized information about the subtle fluctuations of our brain state that we could never sense on our own. So this is really empowering for us, because then we can harness this knowledge and learn to regulate something that previously was outside of our awareness. So that's really why neurofeedback and biofeedback can be so powerful, is it's giving us information about something that's outside of our conscious awareness. And when we have this information moment to moment, then we can now learn to regulate it. Again, going back to heart rate, if we have our smartwatch and we're looking at our heart rate, we can do guided imagery or breathing exercises, and we can lower our resting heart rate with intentional breathing. So even though our heart rate is primarily managed outside of our conscious control by the unconscious parts of our brain, we can do a conscious process and impact that. So even though we don't have full voluntary control, we can learn to regulate it, we can have impact. And that's essentially what we're harnessing with NeuroFit, is the ability to change our brains and change our bodies. So this is a graphic I really like. It breaks down what I just kind of laid out for you, but it gives you little graphics that kind of helps you take the steps through in your mind. So again, NeuroFit is a learning therapy. So the key of learning is feedback. Are you moving in the direction that you want to go? And repetition. So let me just take you through this graphic step by step. So step one, there's sensors on the head measuring your brainwave activity. So again, EEG is also called brainwaves. It's electrical activity of the brain, relates to brain state and brain functionality. That's what it represents and correlates with. And so what I mean when I say that is the brainwaves, our brain function, it correlates with emotional processing, cognitive processing, and behavioral patterns. So it's an objective measure that attempts to quantify those entities. So we measure the EEG. It's digitized and recorded in real time and analyzed in the software. So then when it's analyzed, so in this example, we're training improved concentration. So parameters have been set for how the brain is supposed to shift brainwave wise to be in a more concentrated state. So measuring your brainwaves to quantify that. Then as you move towards a more focused state incrementally, that's when you get feedback. So auditory or visual feedback, where I'm going to show you some examples of that in a few slides, but it could be a game, it could be video, it could be music. So again, in real time, letting you know when you're shifting towards that focus state or you're going towards a distracted state, quantified by your brainwave shifts. Again, something that normally would be outside of your conscious awareness. So it's really important to know that with NeuroFit, you wouldn't just be sitting there trying to focus really hard. You're going to be intending to focus, but then the feedback is going to guide you and reinforce you as you go into that focus state. So how it guides you, the visual cues might be you're running a race and the runner goes faster. You'd be watching a video and it goes from dark to full color. You could earn points. So there's auditory and visual cues letting you know if you're shifting in the direction that you want to go. And so this is what facilitates learning. So that's how you improve it. When you get a reward, then that reinforces it. And then you repeat that over and over again. And it's that practice and that repetition that facilitates learning. This is actually a really common phenomena for how we learn. It's just breaking it down because a lot of times we don't think about it at this technical level. So what are you training exactly when you do NeuroFit? What are brainwaves? So I just wanted to go over the basics as an introduction. So we have 4 major frequencies that we analyze in neurofeedback. And so starting from the bottom, we have delta, then theta, alpha, and beta. So delta and theta are considered slower waves. Alpha is your mid-range wave, and then beta are your fast waves. So as you see on the left side of this graphic, the terms correlate what we call arousal or alertness level. So slow waves correlate with what's called low arousal or low activation in the brain, and fast waves correlate with high arousal or greater activations of the brain. This is an imperfect analogy, but I often think of this like gears in the car, so of an engine. So delta is similar to your first gear, theta second, alpha is third, and beta and high beta are fourth and fifth. Now, of course, the brain is much more complex than just being one engine. It would be as if there's 10,000 engines that need to coordinate and communicate. But you get the general principle. It's important to note that there are no good or bad brain waves. There are brain waves that get researched more, trained more, or talked about, but they're all important. They all correlate with sophisticated necessary function. So what we're looking at with NeuroFit is flexibility and ratio. So we want to be able to shift our brain state, ramp up or ramp down, ramp up if we're leading a board meeting, or ramp up for a test, but we don't want to ramp up too high where we get anxious or obsessive or have a panic attack. And then we also want to be able to shift our brain state and ramp down if we're watching a movie, if we're laying out in the sun, trying to doze off for a nap. So that requires flexibility. So brain health is an optimal level of flexibility, not too rigid, but then also not hyper flexible either. So when we're doing NeuroFit, the sensors are measuring these brainwave frequencies, and then based on your reported symptoms and your goals, certain brainwaves are going to be measured, and then you're going to be fed back information about that. So let's take a common protocol or program, as it's called in NeuroFit. So let's say you want to train focus. So beta waves are associated with increased focus, so greater activation in the brain, right? We want our brain to be able to ramp up to accomplish a task. So if we don't have enough beta waves, we can't focus properly. Having too many theta waves, which is similar to brakes or the brain being slowed down, that makes the brain distractible or disorganized. So a NeuroFit program for training attention would train to increase beta waves and decrease theta waves. So what do I mean by increase or decrease? So that means on the programming side, certain parameters are set. So let's say your theta waves are too high, which is correlated with what is called cortical slowing. Doesn't mean you're less intelligent at all. It just means the brain is less alert or awake. So let's say someone has excess theta. So let's say their theta is at 20 microvolts. So on the programming side in the NeuroFit program, I would set a threshold, or the technician would set a threshold at 18 microvolts. So when your theta goes below that, again, something you can't consciously notice when it drops from 20 to 18, well, then you're below the threshold and you're meeting the criteria. So when you do that, then you get a positive reward on your screen. And so that's how the brain learns. So that's an example of the frequencies that would be trained in a NeuroFit protocol. So just generally, what are these frequencies associated with? So delta is associated a lot with background biological function. We have delta waves when we're awake, but delta is most commonly correlated with deep sleep. Theta waves, are the next range of slow waves, and that's correlated with midbrain function. If you've heard of the limbic system, that's one of the areas it's associated with. So again, it's still correlated with unconscious processing. And deeper brain, actually midbrain function. So, and it's going to be associated with low arousal and low alertness. So if someone is in a daydreamy state, they're going to have higher theta, really deep kinds of meditation. And then a problematic time is if you're awake and trying to focus, but your theta is really elevated, that can be correlated with grogginess, distractibility, disorganization. Alpha next is our mid-range wave. So it's the bridge between our slow and fast waves. It is a frequency that correlates with conscious processing. So primarily alpha is associated with integrating our feelings, becoming aware of them, and synchronizing large amounts of information. So a lot of times adults are predominantly in an alpha range when they're functioning in a healthy way. So being in the zone or a state of flow is correlated with increased alpha. So you have a high synchronization of information. You're in the present moment. You're not overactivated, you're not self-critical or ruminating, but you're not underactivated or too low arousal, sleepy or distracted. So you're in that range of kind of prime alertness, immersed in the moment. And that's what alpha is correlated with. Now, of course, alpha could be too high or too low, and that would be correlated with emotional behavioral difficulties. But that is a description of when you're at that prime range of alpha. And then the last frequency is beta and also high beta. And so that's going to be 13 hertz or above. Hertz is how many waves there are per second. So these are really fast little waves that correlate with what's called cortical function or activation. So beta waves correlate with problem solving, concentration, goal-directed activity, making judgments and decisions, perceiving things. So functions that are very easily consciously tracked and that we're consciously aware of. So as I said earlier, beta is important for attention and focus. So if it's too low, we have trouble focusing, remembering, motivating ourselves. But if beta is too high, then we would also have difficulties most commonly associated with rumination and worry and not being able to quiet our minds. So if beta is too high, people can have trouble with anxiety, worry, or trouble sleeping. So how can NeuroFit help? Why would someone book an appointment for NeuroFit? So generally, these broad arenas of brain function, so attention, cognition, mood regulation, peak performance, or what might be called brain optimization, motivation, impulsivity, and sleep. So this is because we're looking at brain waves, and the brain is the primary control panel for these broad general cognitive, social, emotional, behavioral functions, right? So there's really a lot we can look at with NeuroFit. So, attention, not only could we improve focus, but also reading comprehension. We could look at improving your processing speed or memory. NeuroFit could be used for quieting the mind, learning to calming the mind down for folks who are prone to be anxious or under a lot of stress. With peak performance, NeuroFit could be used to help with academics. So if you're, in college, for instance, having trouble focusing, remembering, and managing that, it can help with athletic performance, musical, theater, or professional. NeuroFit could also improve motivation. So sometimes people have trouble, they want to do homework or know that they need to, maybe don't want to, but NeuroFit can help train taking initiative, which is how some people can get stuck. It can also help reduce impulsivity or hyperactivity, and it can help improve your sleep. So sometimes helping people fall asleep sooner or not wake up as much in the middle of the night and have better quality. And it can help also regulate mood. So in line with Palm's value and mission, this is a different approach. So it comes from a holistic perspective. So one, it can be very empowering where you're involved in your own healing. So that really helps facilitate a sense of agency. We're looking to address underlying brain dynamics. So even though we use the symptoms that you're reporting to guide the goals in the program, what NeuroFit does is it trains and addresses underlying brain dynamics. So how the brain basically can get stuck in these inflexible, rigid patterns. And so that's where, even though we might be trying really hard, we might have really good intentions, we might be really smart, but we feel like our brain is stuck. And in this way, looking at brainwaves and training brainwaves, our brains really can be stuck. It really can be locked into this rigid pattern. So what NeuroFit can do broadly is help train us away from these rigid patterns to patterns of greater flexibility and regulation. So we're really looking at training and addressing to the underlying cause, as opposed to some approaches that might just try to, address the symptom, but not look at the underlying cause. One note on this slide for the hypoactivation, that's a similar component to what we just talked about. The brain can be running too fast or too slow. So NeuroFit broadly trains towards balance. We're looking towards training to that mid-range. So an important way to conceptualize NeuroFit is it's like going to the gym for your brain. So you would never go to the gym once, lift weights and say, I'm not stronger, this doesn't work. NeuroFit is not that kind of approach. It takes repetition and learning over time. And so typically what you would expect to notice is incremental improvements over time, kind of like the slow and steady improvement from eating healthy or working out. So what's really positive about that, again, besides it's empowering and engages you in your own healing, is those shifts when we're training the underlying patterns and the changes happen slow and steadily. Those are changes that are more likely to last long term. And with NeuroFit, we're looking at the programs being based on your goals. The progress that you make is going to be tracked with questionnaires. We're going to take initial score of the questionnaire that you take at the first session, and then that will be given over time after you've had so many trainings of NeuroFit. And this can be just a very powerful process towards achieving greater well-being. So what does the first NeuroFit session look like? So you would discuss the goals with your technician. What do you want to improve? Are you feeling anxious? Are you having trouble sleeping? Are you stressed? Do you want to focus better? So with NeuroFit, we can focus on these 6 broad categories: anxiety, stress, attention and focus, brain optimization, headaches, memory and cognitive processing, and mood. So I have programs, several programs that address these 6 broad areas into our NeuroFit arsenal, so to speak. So when you tell your technician your goals, then your program will be based on what I have categorized is the program to best help you achieve that goal. And for each of those 6 categories, there are several programs that you can try. So if you find good results with the first program, let's say an improved attention, but you're still feeling like there's further that you can go, then you can also try the next option the next program for training attention. So there's this whole regimen that you could go through. So we're going to track your progress, like I said. So we're going to be involved in how you're doing. If you're training attention, there's also a standardized test that you'll take. It's called the continuous performance test, and it gives an objective quantitative score for attention and impulsivity. And so then we can also administer that along the way. So we'll see how you improve. We can adjust the program if your goals change. Let's say you're coming for focus and then you lose your job or something really stressful happens, and then we can change to a stress reduction program or anxiety reduction program. We'll also be working with you along the way. You can always have an appointment with me if there's a point where you start to feel stuck, or if something about your situation changes. Let's say you're training for attention with NeuroFit, and then along the way, unfortunately, you get a concussion. Well, then that's something we can pivot and adjust. We would pause NeuroFit for a little bit, allow time for your brain to heal, and then you can meet with me and we could look at which neurofeedback option is best for you at that point. And then all of the programs that I designed in NeuroFit, they're based on research, clinical outcomes, and my clinical experience. So what does a NeuroFit session look like? So the equipment used in NeuroFit is designed to be easy to use, minimal wires and fast setup. So we use what's called a Muse headset, and then there's an auxiliary sensor who can train many parts on the head. And then your feedback screen is an iPad that you'll hold in your lap with headphones, so getting that auditory and visual feedback. So it's a really versatile, easy to use setup. And then the technician will have the clinical dashboard. You won't see that, but that's where they'll be able to track your program, your progress on a PC. So this is the equipment that we use. So the headset has multiple sensors across the forehead. There's embedded sensors on the ear that measures temporal related activity. And then there's this electrode as well that we can place on the scalp to train targeted areas on the head. So this is an example of a NeuroFit feedback screen. Let me just play it for you. So when you have your headset on and your sensors, again, let's say you're training attention. As you're focusing better, you're the screen spaceship, and you will go faster beating your opponent. If you start to get distracted, you slow down. And let me show you another one. Oh, let me pause that. So before I go to the next screen, there's also these dots here. So this is the MindLift software that we use. So in NeuroFit, there's a specific hardware and software. This is a software with the gives the feedback. But these dots also show if you're in the zone or the brain state that you're training in your NeuroFit session. So you could be training likely 3 to 4 metrics or parameters. And so when you're in this inner circle, when the dots are in the inner circle, then you're in the zone, or you're in a focus state, let's say, as an example. When one of the dots is outside in this outside ring, then that metric is outside of the zone. So the goal when you're training with the software is to get all the dots aligned. And so one of the things that you'll get your own style when you do NeuroFit sessions is some people like to look at this main visual feedback. Like I said, this one's a rocket or a spaceship. So as you shift your brain the direction you want it to go, the spaceship flies faster. And if you get distracted or bored, then it slows down. Other folks like to look at the dots when they're in alignment. So you develop your own routine and style and approach that works for you. And then this bar across the top is how much time is left in that segment. And then also when you're going towards the positive, that means you're more towards the zone. Towards this negative, you're away from the zone. So this is another screen. This time you're the alien in the dark shirt. So you run faster and there's more steps when you're more in the zone, and slow down when you're not. So again, when you're in the zone, speed up, more auditory feedback, and outside the zone, slow down, and the feedback goes quiet. So that's how that feedback loop is created. So not all of the feedback is games. Those are just two examples. Some people who are competitive or training attention, those are very useful for. But if someone's anxious or has performance anxiety, there's other kinds of feedback formats, relaxing audio or music, videos. So that's something that technician will make recommendations and help you tailor the feedback selections you need to make that works best for you and for your goals. So just some frequently asked questions about NeuroFit. I would recommend that you train at least 5 to 10 sessions of the same program, ideally. And again, that's because this is a learning service, it's based on learning theory. So we don't learn without repetition. So that's going to give you the best chance to notice more moderate to significant improvements from NeuroFit. And then you can also train more than 10 sessions. If you're noticing really good benefit, it would be easily good on average for someone to train, 10 to 20 appointments of a specific program. There's no technical limit to the number of sessions that you could do. Of course, you'd always be checking in on your progress and goals and how you're doing. If there's a point where you feel like you've really made the improvements with NeuroFit that you were seeking, then we just want to make sure that those gains are maintained for a while, and then you could stop with NeuroFit, and then we can just check in. It would be, when you're starting off, I would recommend a minimum of doing 1 NeuroFit session a week. Again, for the learning, when you have that repetition with less time in between, that enhances the learning curve. If you really like it or you're really motivated, you could train up to once a day. So we want to have 1 night's sleep between training, because sleep is when, of course, our brain rests, but also when we integrate memory. So it's been found that a night's sleep between NeuroFit or neurofeedback is optimal. As I mentioned, we can change the program if your goals change. There's obviously people who have higher levels of neuroplasticity, and there's individual variability to responsiveness to NeuroFit. So there is a chance that you could train, do several sessions of NeuroFit and not feel like you're noticing the gains that you want. And that's a part of the process that's going to happen for some folks. So that's why under each program type for attention, let's say there's 4 built-in programs that can train attention. So we'll have you train the primary one that typically is the most effective for folks, but it won't be effective for all. So we could try the second or third training program if you've done several sessions and you're not noticing improvement. Also, the versatility of NeuroFit is that can be blended with other options. So I'm going to get into this in a second about the differences. But so you could do NeuroFit as a wellness service and not having met with me, but let's say you have gotten a brain map with me and have done clinical neurofeedback with me, and you're doing really well, but you still want to get some neurofeedback training for maintenance or kind of a booster here and there, but your gains are really stable and you no longer, if you're getting therapy or counseling with me, that's no longer needed or you never did, then someone might be able to transition from clinical neurofeedback to NeuroFit, or sometimes transition from a brain map with me and the 19 channel QEEG, and then just a couple of sessions and then go to NeuroFit. So it's going to give a lot more options for folks wanting to do neurofeedback or brain training. And so I'm really excited about that. So what's the difference between clinical neurofeedback and NeuroFit? So the main difference is with clinical neurofeedback here at Palm, the first session is getting what's called a 19 channel brain map, or a QEEG with me. So that is when, like this graphic here, this is an EEG cap. It has embedded sensors in the mesh, kind of fits like a swim cap. And then gel is put into those sensors, and then we record your brain waves or EEG at all of those 19 recording sensors. So we get a comprehensive look at the brain. So then after those recordings, I analyze all of that data, looking at what's called relative and normed databases, comparing your results to what would be considered typical for your age. And then I analyze all of that data, put it together in a brain map report. And then the neurofeedback protocols are based on the result of your QEEG. So your objective data of your brain function right now. So that's the biggest difference of clinical neurofeedback versus NeuroFit, is getting this initial QEEG, which with clinical neurofeedback, then I base all of my protocols off of your specific brain map. Whereas with NeuroFit, you have common programs I've preset, and then those programs are selected based off of your reported symptoms. So also clinical neurofeedback is with me, and I'm a licensed therapist. For some folks, this is appropriate and really helpful. I blend neurofeedback with what's, psychotherapy, which is also just called therapy or counseling. So this might be appropriate for someone with past trauma, anxiety and relationship issues. So it can have this really powerful synergistic effect that you can get both of those kinds of therapy from one clinician. So as a licensed therapist, clinical neurofeedback can be used to help with mental health concerns or the overlapping mental, emotional, functional medicine concerns like headache, post-concussion, PTSD. So all of this would be, in collaboration with the appropriate medical providers. So we can use clinical neurofeedback to help with post-concussion symptoms. Obviously, that client would be under the care of a neurologist. It would have been a certain amount of time since their concussion. And then myself as the neurofeedback specialist can join the team to help reduce the client's post-concussion symptoms. Clinical neurofeedback can also be used for medication-resistant seizures. Again, this would be under the supervision of a neurologist, of course. I work with them collaboratively, and I would do neurologist-determined neurofeedback protocols. So with clinical neurofeedback, there's just a option for more intensive care than would be appropriate for NeuroFit. The other thing, as a sidebar, I am a licensed therapist, so I could be the standalone mental health person on the team for a client if their presenting concerns fall within my arena of expertise, such as anxiety, past trauma, ADHD, etc. And that would not be appropriate with NeuroFit. So just some other frequently asked questions. So with clinical neurofeedback, you're going to look at the 20 to 40 session range, it's recommended that you train 1 to 3 times a week, especially at the beginning, again, for that principle of repetition. Similar to NeuroFit, the responsiveness varies on neuroplasticity and individual responsiveness. And then when we have a brain map with clinical neurofeedback, we're able to see the patterns of overactivation or underactivation. And so some with more complex patterns, greater patterns of dysregulation, all other things being equal, it would just take more sessions, of course, to train their brain towards regulation. So this is an example of a brain map. It is a little pixelated, but it's a good one of pre-post clinical neurofeedback. So this top row, just look at the top right figure. So it's a head map. And so that orange, the yellow and orange, so shows an elevation of slow waves or elevation of what's called the theta beta ratio. And so that is a pattern that correlates with ADHD, attention issues, distractibility, disorganization. And so that orange shows a dysregulated pattern, a brain that's unable to focus, even if someone's trying really hard to focus, the brain is locked into that pattern. And so this bottom row, again, if you look at the bottom right figure or head map, you'll see how now there's no longer any orange color, and now and most of the yellow is gone. So green means there's not an elevation of theta or the theta beta ratio. So this is an example of how clinical neurofeedback uses, it's data driven, it uses these objective evaluations to guide your protocols or programs, and then we can quantify your progress down the road after 20, 30 sessions. So just to summarize, so NeuroFit is based on reported symptoms and stated goals. It's with a wellness technician. It's a wellness service. It's not a mental health service. So just to really clarify the difference between clinical neurofeedback and NeuroFit, it's not appropriate for complex mental health or medical concerns. It is appropriate as an adjunct or supplementary service when you're under the care of your appropriate medical professional. So if you're seeing a physician here for an autoimmune disorder, or you're under their medical care for a variety of medical concerns, and they might recommend that you do NeuroFit just to help reduce stress or quiet your mind or enhance your sleep, that would be appropriate because you've been referred by a home physician, and it is a supportive treatment while you're already under a qualified care. So what's really important is that NeuroFit is not a standalone medical or mental health service at all. It's a supportive adjunct service to work with other services that you're getting. And then we had I have a couple examples that I kind of alluded to there at the bottom of the slide as examples. So this is another picture of what NeuroFit could look like with the headset, the sensor, and the iPad. So if you're looking, you have more wellness, broad wellness goals. It's more budget friendly. It makes it more accessible. It's easy to use and symptom based. So that's the advantages of NeuroFit, and could be a good fit for you if that's what you're looking for. And then when you're looking for the more in-depth, integrative treatment, data-driven, more complex concerns or goals, then that's where clinical neurofeedback would be more appropriate, especially if you're looking for that integration into mental, emotional, psychological concerns. So how do you decide what are your diagnoses? What are your goals? Who are your current healthcare providers? Especially if you're working with a physician or clinician here at Palm, you could talk with them. about additional goals that you have and NeuroFit. And just broadly think about if you don't have the appropriate qualified professional already, then probably wouldn't go to NeuroFit first. You need to go to a therapist, a psychiatrist, a neurologist, a physician first, and then look at adding in NeuroFit if you have these more intensive medical or health concerns. And so these are a list of resources if you're interested in doing some more research. The top 3 are professional alliances or groups for biofeedback and neurofeedback. And so those are really good resources. There's some introduction videos there and a lot of resources if you're interested in reading studies or looking at book recommendations and further webinars. And then MindLift is that's again the software that we use for NeuroFit, and they have some really good resources as well. So if you have any questions or if you're interested in NeuroFit, please go to palmhealth.com. And again, I'm Ashley Wiegand, and thank you for attending this webinar. I hope you found it helpful. And for those of you who are interested, enjoy trying out NeuroFit.